Ever wonder how therapists, keep their skills sharp? Like you see athletes constantly training, right?
Yeah.
So today we're diving into this study about a method called deliberate practice.
Okay.
And, get this, it might actually make therapists worse.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Deliberate practice, or DP, is all about like structured, really focused effort.
Right.
Kind of like you know how a musician would practice the same passage over and over again to perfect it?
Sure.
It's been incredibly successful in other fields.
Yeah.
So naturally the thought is, could this work in psychotherapy?
Yeah. It makes sense to me. So walk us through this study. What do they actually do?
Okay. So researchers in Sweden, they took 37 therapists. These therapists specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. That's a type of therapy that focuses on how, thoughts and feelings and behaviors, how they're all connected.
Right.
They split these therapists randomly into two groups.
Okay.
One group got this very intensive 8-week DP training course,
Okay.
and the other group was a control group,
Right.
meaning they didn't do anything different.
They just continued with their usual work. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. Now, the DP group, they were practicing specific therapy skills, doing role-playing, they were giving feedback to each other, really honing in on those techniques.
So far, sounds pretty standard. What were they measuring, though, to see if the DP training actually made a difference?
Yeah, so they were looking at something called the working alliance. And that is basically, it's that trust and bond that you really want to have between a therapist and their patient.
Yeah.
It's, I like to think of it as like the foundation of a house.
Yeah.
Without it, things are going to get shaky, right?
Right, for sure.
The idea was that DP would make that alliance stronger.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what did they find? Did it work?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. So instead of getting better, the therapists who went through the DP training actually showed a trend toward a weaker working alliance.
Really?
Yeah.
According to their patients?
According to their patients, yes.
Interesting.
Now, I do have to emphasize this wasn't statistically significant, meaning that it could have been due to chance.
Wait, hold on. So let me get this straight. The therapists who did the focus training might have gotten worse at connecting with their patients, even though that's what they were practicing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to make it even more surprising, the control group, the ones who didn't do anything special, they actually showed some signs of improvement in their working alliance scores.
Now, that's what I call a plot twist.
Yeah.
What could possibly explain that?
I mean, it really makes you wonder if just going through the motions of practice, even for therapists, isn't really enough. Think about it. You can practice your tennis serve, let's say, 1,000 times, but without a coach to point out what you're doing wrong, are you really improving?
That's a really good point. So are you saying that it was the way they were practicing, not the practice itself, that might have been the problem?
It's definitely a possibility. And this study, while small, it starts to highlight the unique challenges of applying something like DP to a field that's as nuanced as psychotherapy.
So if it's not just about therapists, clocking in practice hours, what are we missing here? Like, what makes therapy so different that this, this tried and true method might actually backfire?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Oh.
In sports or music, let's say, you're often aiming for like a technically perfect execution,
right?
Hitting that note flawlessly or executing a move with precision.
Right.
But therapy, it's about connection.
Yeah.
It's about empathy. It's about responding to a person in real time. You can't script that.
That's so true. I imagine like practicing a technique like active listening, say in a role play scenario,
right,
is very different from doing it with a real patient who's really pouring their heart out to you.
Exactly. And this study, though it has its limitations, it throws a wrench in our assumptions. It's not to say that deliberate practice has no place in therapy,
right?
But we need to be much more thoughtful about how we adapt it.
Okay, so let's dive into those limitations a bit. The study mentioned relying on patient feedback.
Right.
What else?
So relying solely on how the patient perceived the working alliance, I mean, that's just one lens, right? Imagine if we also had the therapist's perspective, like on how connected they felt, or even like, an outside expert observing the session.
Oh, interesting.
A much richer picture, right?
Absolutely. It's like trying to understand a whole relationship based on one person's side of the story.
Exactly.
You need both perspectives and maybe even like some outside observations to really kind of grasp the dynamics at play.
Precisely. And then, then there's the sample size.
Yeah.
37 therapists all doing CBT.
Yeah.
It's a good start.
Right.
But for more, definitive answers, we'd need larger, more diverse groups.
Right.
Different types of therapy, different patient populations.
Right.
That adds layers of complexity that we just can't ignore.
So bigger, broader studies are definitely needed.
Mm-hmm.
For you, what's the most important takeaway from this study, even with its limitations?
I think it's a powerful reminder that in therapy, one size does not fit all.
Mm-hmm.
Just like each patient is unique,
Yeah.
each therapist is going to have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Of course, yeah.
And this study suggests that, a standardized approach to improving skills, while, well-intentioned,
Yeah.
might actually miss the mark.
That makes a lot of sense.
Huh.
So how do we move forward then if like a cookie-cutter DP program isn't the answer?
Yeah.
What could a more effective approach to therapist development look like?
Well, if we look at fields where DP has been successful, there's a common thread:
Okay.
expert guidance.
Okay.
Think of a top-tier athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have a coach who deeply understands the sport, can really pinpoint their weaknesses and tailor their training regimen accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy could benefit from that same level of individualized attention.
So are you suggesting every therapist needs a mentor? Like a therapy guru to guide their every move?
Not necessarily a guru for every therapist, but access to that level of expertise, absolutely.
Okay.
It could be through, regular supervision with a more seasoned clinician.
Mm-hmm.
It could be peer-to-peer mentoring where therapists are observing and providing feedback to one another, even utilizing, technology to create platforms for virtual coaching and feedback.
I like that idea. Using technology to make this kind of mentorship more accessible.
Right.
What if there was a way for therapists to record their sessions, obviously with patient consent,
Right, of course.
and then get feedback from a network of experts?
Yeah.
Kind of like having a team of coaches reviewing your game tape.
Exactly. And not just general feedback, but highly specific insights, tailored to their individual goals.
Right.
Maybe one therapist wants to get better at managing silence in a session.
Right.
Another one needs help setting boundaries with a challenging patient.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of individualized feedback is crucial for targeted growth.
It sounds like we're really talking about, moving away from this one-size-fits-all model of training and towards something that's much more personalized, much more responsive to the individual therapist's needs.
Precisely. Instead of, just drilling those same techniques over and over again,
Right.
imagine a world where therapists can really identify their own areas for growth.
Right.
Maybe it is getting more comfortable with silence.
Yeah.
Maybe it is managing those moments when a patient's emotions are running really high.
Right, right.
And they could seek out targeted feedback and guidance on those specific skills.
So kind of like creating a personalized training program based on their own strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly.
That's constantly kind of evolving as they gain more experience.
Exactly. And this kind of individualized approach, it requires a shift in mindset too, right?
Oh, interesting.
It's
Yeah.
not just about checking off boxes or accumulating hours of practice.
Right.
It's about really cultivating this spirit of continuous learning.
Yeah, yeah.
A curiosity about, what's working, what's not working. How can I continue to refine my craft? That makes me think back to something you said earlier about, this idea of having expert guidance.
Right.
But realistically, not every therapist is going to have access to, a seasoned mentor
Right.
or a team of coaches.
Sure.
How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's where I think technology has the potential to be really, really transformative.
Okay.
Imagine online platforms, right?
Yeah.
Where therapists can connect with, really experienced clinicians in their specific area of focus.
Yeah.
They could share challenging case studies,
Mm-hmm.
get feedback in a structured, supportive environment.
So like a virtual community of practice
Exactly.
where therapists can kind of learn from each other's experiences
Yeah.
and support each other's growth.
Precisely. And these platforms could also incorporate things like, standardized patient simulations.
Oh, wow.
Almost like flight simulators, but for therapists,
Interesting.
where they can practice handling, really difficult clinical scenarios
Yeah.
and get real-time feedback on their performance.
Wow.
But it's in a safe, controlled environment.
Now, that's what I call innovative.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like we're talking about like a pretty radical shift in how we think about, therapist development.
Yeah.
Moving away from like this passive learning and towards something that's much more active, more engaging,
Yeah.
and much more tailored to the individual.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that becoming an effective therapist, it's a lifelong journey, not a destination. And like any journey worth taking, it requires a willingness to embrace the unknown, to learn from our mistakes, and to just constantly strive for mastery.
And that's what makes this work so incredibly challenging, but also so incredibly rewarding. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with one final thought for you, our listener. If you were designing the ideal training program for therapists, what would be your top priority? What elements would you absolutely insist on?
What a great question to consider. It really gets at the heart of what we've been talking about today, the need for training that's not just effective, but it's engaging, it's relevant, and ultimately it's in service of helping therapists become the best possible versions of themselves for the clients they serve.
Beautifully said. And on that note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of therapist development. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to make a difference.